When I was 12 years old, the local veterinarian picked me up to deliver piglets at my brother's and pulled the little piggies out. Then I came home and I told my mother I would like to become a veterinarian. I've never been sorry about that.
For years, fans tuned in to the incredible Dr. Pol, not just for the animals, but because of him, his grit, his wisdom, his no-nonsense Dutch charm, and that deep love he had for every creature that walked, flew, or limped through his clinic doors. But then, something changed. Dr. Pol had an accident. What really happened on that fateful day? Stay right here, because by the end of this video, you'll not only know the truth, you'll understand why the world may never see another vet quite like the incredible Dr. Pol. The early life and rise of Dr. Pol. Jan Harm Pol's journey is the kind of story that doesn't just unfold, it evolves, grows, and keeps surprising you at every turn. Born on September 4, 1942, in the quiet village of Wateren in Drenthe, Netherlands, he entered the world surrounded by wide green fields, the clatter of barn doors, and the gentle mooing of cows in the early morning. He was the youngest of 6 children, which meant he grew up with hand-me-downs, plenty of chores, and more than his fair share of animal encounters. His family's dairy farm wasn't just a place to live. It was a place where lessons were learned the hard way, where responsibility started early, and where life revolved around animals big and small. Dairy cows, pigs, sheep, chickens, and anything else that wandered into their care. It was here, on this farm, that Jan Harm, better known to most now as Dr. Pol, discovered what would become his lifelong passion. He was just 12 years old when a sow went into labor, and someone needed to help her deliver her piglets. He stepped up. Imagine that, barely a teenager, elbow deep in a moment that would shape the rest of his life. That one experience planted a seed. Who could have guessed that the boy guiding piglets into the world would one day become a household name? What if one unexpected moment could end everything you built over a lifetime? That's exactly what happened to Dr. Pol. One tragic accident and suddenly the man we all looked up to, gone from the spotlight. But what really happened that day? Was it just bad luck? Or was it something deeper? Stick with us, because the truth behind this accident will leave you speechless. Fast forward to 1961, and life took an unexpected twist. Through a high school exchange program, Pol found himself in Mayville, Michigan. That 1 year in the United States would prove more important than anyone could have predicted, not just because of the new culture, the exposure, or even the country life that reminded him of home, but because it was there he met Diane Dalrymple, the young woman who would later become his wife and lifelong partner in every sense. After returning to the Netherlands, Pol enrolled at Utrecht University, one of the top schools in the country. It was no small feat, but in 1970, he graduated with a degree in veterinary medicine, officially turning his childhood calling into a profession. In 1971, the story took another sharp turn. He immigrated back to the United States. This time, with more than just curiosity, he had a career to build and a family life to start. He and Diane settled in Harbor Beach, Michigan, and for the next 10 years, Dr. Pol dedicated himself to working in a veterinary practice that primarily served large farm animals. The work wasn't glamorous, and the days were long, but it was the kind of medicine he knew well. He was comfortable out in the fields, knee-deep in mud and manure, helping the animals that kept rural America running. But after a decade of working for someone else, Pol and Diane decided it was time to take a leap. In 1981, they packed up and moved to Weedman, Michigan. With interest rates hovering around 20%, yes, 20%, starting a new business wasn't exactly easy, but that didn't stop them. They started small, really small. Their first clinic was a simple room built in the corner of their garage. That's right, one room. No fancy equipment, no flashy signs, just grit, knowledge, and the willingness to work harder than anyone else. Can you imagine running a veterinary clinic from a garage? But that's how they did it. As the years passed, their practice, Paul Veterinary Services, began to grow. Slowly but surely, they earned the trust of their community. Eventually, they were able to purchase a piece of property next door and set up a double-wide trailer to serve as the clinic. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. That trailer might not have looked impressive from the outside, but what was happening inside was nothing short of remarkable. Back then, about 80% of Dr. Pohl's work was focused on dairy cattle. The other 20%? Horses, dogs, cats, whoever needed help. But the balance shifted over time. As Michigan's rural landscape changed and family farms disappeared, Dr. Pohl adapted. That's something he's always done well. He's practical, not flashy. His style of veterinary medicine might not always be textbook perfect, but it works. He calls it common sense veterinary medicine. Nothing fancy, no unnecessary treatments, just straightforward care based on what he learned all those years ago, back in the 1970s. Being a veterinarian means providing service to the clients, Dr. Pohl once said. He believed in honesty, hard work, and treating people the way he'd want to be treated. And it showed. Over the next 4 decades, his little garage practice grew into something enormous, something that eventually served over 25,000 clients and treated hundreds of thousands of animals. Isn't that incredible? From a room in his garage to thousands of patients from all over Michigan. But here's what's truly impressive. Even as the practice grew and his name became known across the country, Dr. Pohl never forgot where he came from. He didn't trade in his boots for boardrooms. He stayed rooted in his rural community, still making farm calls, still getting up before dawn to treat a sick cow or help a goat deliver its kid. Fame might have found him later, but it didn't change him. He was, and still is, that same Dutch farm boy at heart, practical, no nonsense, and deeply committed to the animals and people around him. How the incredible Dr. Pohl became a TV phenomenon. The story of how the incredible Dr. Pohl went from a quiet, small-town veterinarian in Weedman, Michigan, to a beloved national television personality didn't begin in a Hollywood studio or with a marketing campaign. It began with a son who simply believed his dad was one of a kind. It all started with Charles Pohl, Dr. Pohl's son, who had veered away from veterinary medicine and pursued a career in entertainment. Charles had been working at Nickelodeon in Los Angeles, rubbing elbows with producers and pitching reality show ideas, when someone gave him a piece of advice that would change everything. Find a character who's larger than life. And just like that, a light bulb went off in his mind. As he later explained, he told his partners, "The largest character I have ever met in my life is my father." He wasn't exaggerating. His dad's job was intense, dramatic, unpredictable, and packed with emotion, just the right blend for a compelling television show. So, what did Charles do? He didn't wait around for a studio to magically see his dad's potential. In 2010, he pulled together a small group, just 2 friends and a cameraman, and made the trip back home to film what would become a rough prototype of the show. Dr. Pohl, ever the no-nonsense, hands-on veterinarian, remembered that time vividly. He came with 2 friends and a cameraman, he said. They filmed everything they could during a single week in May, gathering an astonishing 27 hours of footage. From all that material, they created a tightly edited 4-minute pitch DVD. And you know what? It worked. National Geographic Wild saw that snippet and liked what they saw. They didn't just like it, they saw the potential in it. Soon after, a production team was sent to Weidman, and just like that, the wheels of something much bigger began turning. But let's be honest, even the best ideas can flop if audiences don't connect with them. So why did people all over the country, and eventually the world, fall in love with the incredible Dr. Pol? Why did this unscripted show about farm animals, late-night emergency visits, and a no-frills veterinarian become so wildly popular? According to Charles, the answer lies in something simple yet powerful: nostalgia. It's a slice of life that people feel very nostalgic for, even if they never experienced it themselves growing up, he explained. There was something grounding and comforting about watching someone who genuinely cared about animals and wasn't afraid to get dirty or stay up all night if it meant saving a life. Dr. Pol himself was very clear about one thing from the beginning: nothing on the show was staged. What you see when we work with animals is what we do. Nothing is done for the camera, he insisted. That transparency was rare in a time when so much of reality TV felt manufactured. His approach made the show feel refreshingly real. You weren't watching a performance, you were watching life. And that authenticity hit home for viewers of all ages. As the numbers show, the series wasn't just a modest success. By April 2025, it had 7.6 times the average audience demand in the United States, putting it in the top 8.6% of all shows nationwide. Imagine that! An unscripted series about a country vet outperforming many big-budget dramas and flashy comedies. The show didn't just entertain, it educated. Teachers across the country began using episodes to teach large animal medicine, especially to students involved in programs like Future Farmers of America, FFA. These weren't just heartwarming stories, they were real case studies that gave young people a glimpse into what it truly means to care for animals, especially in rural communities. Isn't it something when a show can both pull at your heartstrings and teach you something new? But behind every polished 40-minute episode was a staggering amount of work. The filming process was intense, even grueling. For just one episode, the crew would film about 100 hours of footage over the course of a week. And this didn't happen once in a while, it happened for about 8 months every year. Filming Dr. Pol wasn't like filming a studio sitcom or even a travel documentary. This was real-time, fast-paced, often chaotic veterinary work. The man didn't wait for the cameras to be ready. Since Dr. Pol is too busy to wait for the crew, we've learned to always be on our toes, one crew member admitted. They even developed a system where each crew member had GPS trackers on their smartphones just to keep up with him. Interestingly, despite all that footage, only about 10% of the clinic's cases ever made it to air. The production team had to strike a delicate balance, choosing stories that were engaging and educational, all while protecting the privacy of clients and their animals. That meant countless hours spent watching footage, picking out key moments, editing them down, and stitching them together in a way that still felt natural and true. No small feat. So perhaps the question we're left with is this: in a world where so much feels artificial or polished to perfection, isn't there something deeply reassuring about watching someone just do their job with care, skill, and compassion? Dr. Pol didn't set out to be famous. He just wanted to help animals. But thanks to Charles's vision, his story, and the stories of every cow, dog, horse, or pig he's ever treated, have found a place in the hearts of viewers everywhere. And as the cameras kept rolling and the expectations piled higher, new pressures started to creep in. Not all of them welcome. And that's where the story takes a turn. Because what happened behind the scenes, well, it was a different kind of battle. One worth sticking around for. The growing pressures behind the scenes. Behind the heartwarming scenes of The Incredible Dr. Paul, where farm animals found healing, owners found comfort, and viewers found wholesome entertainment, was a storm quietly brewing. And for some, it had been gathering strength since the show first aired. While millions around the world tuned in to cheer on Dr. John Paul as he treated everything from cows with twisted stomachs to dogs with broken legs, a growing number of professionals within the veterinary field watched with a very different emotion, deep concern. Why? Because what they saw on screen, to them, wasn't just unconventional. It was unacceptable. From the very beginning, many veterinarians weren't just skeptical. They were alarmed. They didn't mince words either. Some described Dr. Paul's medical methods as atrocious, appalling, and even unforgivable. Now, how often do you hear one professional speak about another that way? It wasn't a matter of petty jealousy or turf wars. It was about what they saw as a serious misrepresentation of proper veterinary care. According to these critics, the show's portrayal of farm medicine, while engaging to the public, ran the risk of normalizing outdated, unsafe practices. One of the most vocal critics, Dr. Eden Myers, didn't just express her disapproval behind closed doors. She launched a public campaign, a petition, and even a Facebook page, specifically calling for the show's cancellation. Imagine how strongly someone must feel to start a movement like that. She wasn't alone, either. On veterinary forums and professional websites, voices chimed in from across the country, raising red flags about what they considered to be dangerous precedents being set on national television. So, what was the show's response to all this? Nat Geo Wild, the network behind The Incredible Dr. Paul, stood by their star. They described him as a man who had spent more than 4 decades practicing a common-sense approach to veterinary medicine, and someone who had saved thousands of animals during his long career. And to be fair, many viewers saw Dr. Paul as exactly that, a no-nonsense, boots-on-the-ground country vet who knew how to get the job done. But even with the network's public support, the criticism never really faded. If anything, it kept gaining momentum. And then came the legal troubles. Because when public pressure meets professional misconduct, the law is often not too far behind. In 2012, things took a serious turn. Michigan state regulators placed Dr. Paul on probation. The reason? A 2010 case involving a pregnant dog whose puppies tragically died under his care. Regulators labeled it negligence. That wasn't an isolated incident either. In 2014, another case came to light. This time, it was a Boston Terrier that had been hit by a car. Dr. Paul performed surgery, but, according to officials, he did so without using the proper surgical attire or monitoring equipment. In other words, procedures that modern veterinary standards consider essential were, in their view, overlooked. Still, the legal wheels kept turning. By 2019, the Michigan Court of Appeals had upheld a ruling that placed Dr. Paul on probation once again, this time for 2 separate cases of alleged negligence. He was 77 years old at the time. His legal team pushed back, arguing that the Michigan Board of Veterinary Medicine had made arbitrary and unfair decisions. But regardless of whether one believes Dr. Paul was wronged or rightfully held accountable, one thing became clear. The pressure was mounting. Legal battles like that don't just drain your finances, they wear you down. They shift public perception. And for a show built around the reputation of one man, that kind of scrutiny can cast a long shadow. So here's the question that lingers in the background. Can a beloved public figure be both a hero to many and a cautionary tale to others? Dr. Pol, for all his warmth and charm on screen, became a lightning rod in the veterinary world. For some, he represented tradition, experience, and hands-on wisdom. For others, he was a symbol of everything that modern veterinary medicine has tried to move away from. But the real story, the one few talk about, is what all of this, the praise, the backlash, the pressure, did to him personally. Because when a tragedy hit close to home, it wasn't just his career that was shaken, it was his heart. The emotional toll that followed wasn't visible on camera, but it ran deep. And in just a moment, we'll explore a side of Dr. Pol that very few have seen. Stick around. Emotional toll after family tragedy. The Pol family, known to millions through the popular TV series The Incredible Dr. Pol, has experienced more than their fair share of heartache, pain that has unfolded far from the camera lights and production crews. For all the smiles and success that have come with Dr. Pol's television fame, there have also been moments of deep personal grief that no one could have seen coming. In February 2016, tragedy hit close to home when Gregory Scott Butch, the devoted husband of Dr. Pol's beloved daughter Kathleen, passed away after a painful and exhausting battle with cancer. For any parent, watching a child go through the pain of losing a spouse is unbearable. And for Dr. Pol and his wife Diane, that loss was not just that of a son-in-law. They had lost a cherished member of the family, someone who had shared birthdays, Sunday dinners, quiet conversations, and countless memories over the years. The silence that follows the absence of someone who once filled the room with laughter can be deafening, can't it? And then, just as the family was still trying to pick up the pieces, life dealt them another devastating blow. In September 2019, only 3 years after Gregory's passing, their grandson, Adam James Butch, died suddenly at just 23 years old. His death came out of nowhere, completely unexpected, jarring, and deeply traumatic. How do you even begin to explain something like that? How do you find the words to describe the pain of losing a young man who hadn't even had the chance to fully step into his future? Adam was a bright light, full of potential, kindness, and passion. He was involved in health education and worked with youth, a path that reflected the compassion that seemed to run in the family. When he died, it shook the entire Pol family to its core. But perhaps no one felt the loss as deeply as Dr. Pol himself. Known for his stoic nature, his practical way of dealing with life and death, especially as a seasoned veterinarian who's no stranger to loss, Dr. Pol was always the calm in the storm. But Adam's passing cracked that shell. It was the kind of grief that didn't allow him to retreat into quiet dignity. Instead, he spoke out, opening up publicly about his heartbreak in a way that was both rare and incredibly moving. For a man who had spent his life helping others, animal and human alike, it became clear that no amount of professional experience could prepare someone for the devastation of losing a grandchild. His voice, typically strong and unwavering, now carried the weight of sorrow, and those who had followed his career for years saw a different side of him. Not just the capable doctor, but the grieving grandfather. On top of the emotional weight, there were also the physical and professional challenges that come with age. By the time Dr. Pol entered his 80s, the very work that had brought him so much purpose and recognition began to demand more than his body could reasonably give. Filming a hit TV show might sound glamorous from the outside, but the reality is far more grueling. For about 8 months each year, he was filming roughly 100 hours of footage every single week. That's not just tiring, it's practically superhuman. Can anyone truly keep up with that kind of schedule indefinitely? As the years caught up with him, his pace naturally began to slow. After all, he had been caring for animals and their owners for decades. The long hours, the hands-on treatments, the unpredictable emergencies, it was a career built on physical endurance and emotional resilience. But no one is invincible. As he aged, keeping up with production schedules became a growing challenge. What used to take a few hours might now require a full day. The producers had to adjust. The crew had to work around his rhythm, and even the storytelling needed to evolve. It wasn't just about showing procedures and quick fixes anymore. It was about showing the journey of a man who had spent his life serving others and was now facing the same ticking clock we all do. Isn't that something everyone can relate to? The feeling of slowing down, of having to choose what truly matters with the time and energy you have left. And yet, despite all the pain, despite the exhausting workload and the weight of loss, Dr. Pol remained committed, not just to his patients, but to the viewers who found comfort, entertainment, and even inspiration in his show. The tragic accident that ended the show. Throughout the long and successful run of the incredible Dr. Pol, there was always one thing quietly looming in the background, something the viewers rarely saw, but the people behind the scenes lived with every single day: the constant worry about safety. You might wonder, how dangerous could filming a veterinary show really be? But as those who worked on it would say, it wasn't just about filming cute animals or capturing miraculous recoveries. It was about being inches away from enormous, unpredictable farm animals, many of them in pain, stressed, or just downright panicked. And that kind of environment comes with real, often overlooked risks. According to people close to the production, safety was always a concern, even in the early days. Cameras rolled as Dr. Pol and his team tackled everything from difficult births to last-minute surgeries in barns, pastures, and sometimes even roadside ditches. But while the show celebrated Dr. Pol's unique old-school style and no-nonsense approach to medicine, there was a whole other story playing out just out of frame. The camera crew, who were mostly untrained in animal handling, were constantly exposed to hazardous conditions. They often found themselves standing dangerously close to kicking hooves, swinging horns, and, on more than one occasion, frightened animals trying to bolt. One crew member even joked, "We're just as likely to get trampled as the vet." But the joking stopped when things took a very real and terrifying turn. The most serious incident happened during a routine shoot involving beef cattle. It was supposed to be just another day of following Dr. Pol into the field, but what happened left a lasting mark on the entire team. A beef cow, agitated and not fully restrained, broke loose and ran directly into a crew member, knocking them down with full force. We've had a number of close calls with the crew, but the most dangerous was probably when one crew member got run down by a beef cow, a production insider shared, clearly still shaken by the memory. And to make matters worse, the footage of the accident was lost, so the event never made it to air. That meant most fans had no idea how serious the behind-the-scenes dangers really were. And unfortunately, that wasn't an isolated incident. Time and time again, situations arose where crew safety was at risk. There was the time a 300-pound calf broke free and ran straight under a crew member, flipping them over completely. In another case, a massive bull being castrated snapped a barn post clean in half. Then there was the alpaca that kicked so close to a camera lens it nearly shattered it. Other unforgettable moments included spooked cows jumping fences and flipping over steel cages, and a 200-pound bloodhound turning on its owner so aggressively that stitches were needed. These weren't rare flukes. They were part of the job, and everyone involved knew it. So why didn't viewers know about any of this? Well, because the show was edited to highlight the fascinating, heartwarming, and sometimes funny parts of rural veterinary work, not the blood, bruises, and very real dangers that came with capturing it on film. But according to the crew, the reality was much more intense than what the audience saw. The scenes you see on The Incredible Dr. Pol are legitimately dangerous, said one staff member. We're not just teasing them up for TV. As these incidents piled up, National Geographic Wild, the network that aired the show, couldn't ignore them any longer. Behind closed doors, discussions began about the sustainability of continuing the show. Network executives quietly launched a comprehensive internal review, diving deep into every safety protocol, every incident report, and every mounting concern. What they found was troubling. It wasn't just the risk to the crew that raised red flags. Dr. Pol himself, now well into his golden years, was still charging into barns and wrestling pigs with the same energy he had 2 decades ago. But age, as everyone knows, has its limits. And if that wasn't enough, criticism from parts of the veterinary community had also grown louder over the years. Some professionals questioned the medical practices shown on air, while others expressed concern about the lack of protective measures for both the animals and the humans involved. It all began to add up, a combination of production risks, aging cast members, industry criticism, rising insurance costs, and even a slight shift in what viewers were tuning in for. So, after careful consideration, the network made the difficult decision. The Incredible Dr. Pol would not continue. Of course, it wasn't a decision made lightly. Dr. Pol had done his part, enforcing safety rules to the best of his ability, doing what he could to keep the crew safe even in unpredictable situations. And in fairness, those rules had helped avoid more serious injuries for years. But sometimes, no matter how careful you are, the nature of the work itself is just too unpredictable. In the end, the decision was about protecting people, something that often gets lost when you're chasing great TV. And while the show may have come to an end, the impact it made is undeniable. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.